let's go back to the reason for my trip and the fun that I did have. And hopefully everybody's looked up Jack Pfefer by now. But for the purposes of this discussion, a lot of the modern research, the books, Brian Solomon's books, Tim Hornbaker's books, research has been done at this Jack Pfefer collection of papers at Notre Dame because it's the single largest by, I would imagine, multiple times, I don't know how many multiple times, largest collection archive of wrestling documents, inside wrestling business information from the late 20s to the mid 60s that exists anywhere in the world and ever probably has been assembled. It encompasses every piece of paper, every document, every telegram, every letter with the envelopes, every business record for the most part that I can determine. I mean, you can only see a small portion of it in a month if you're an individual person, but every scrap of paper, record, clipping, photo, press release, poster that came into Jack Pfeffer's hands in the 40 years that he was in the wrestling business. And I say that, but there's apparently, from what they say, there is a gap, unfortunately, during the 1930 to 1933 years, the biggest years of business in wrestling, that they think may have gone into another set of hands because the way that Pfeffer was able to retain all this shit and the odd duck that he was, the motivations for it, etc. He had, not only was he one of the old time wrestling promoters that kept a hotel suite or room or whatever in like one of the hotels in New York City, the Piccadilly Hotel.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, this was the days where the hotels weren't the Hampton or the Red Roof Inn or the Super 8 or whatever. It was the Ambassador Hotel in Houston or the, International Hotel in Pittsburgh or whatever.
The Algonquin's booked. I'll take the Piccadilly.
Yeah. That's the thing, is these were inner city, downtown, old fashioned hotels like you see in the movies. So he kept that, but also he had storage places apparently around Manhattan for years. And he never had a home. He worked out of hotels. There were hotels in Houston, hotels in Nashville, hotels in California. And people would be sending him telegrams to these locations. But nevertheless, so all of this material that he had saved ended up when he was, elderly and the last years of his life, he lived with the wrestling promoter that ran Boston in the early 60s, Tony Santos, who he had been close with, who was one of the last major market promoters that really relied exclusively on him for talent. And he lived with him and then moved into a nursing home. Tony Santos ended up with this entire 5 tons, apparently, of all of this material. And I mean, it was 50 years ago. Tony Santos was not a young man. There was no call for, preserving wrestling history amongst the business at that point, and not a lot of the fans. But Eddie Einhorn, who was the guy who ran the IWA, we've talked about that before, the Chicago White Sox owner, he was a big fan, and he did kind of like what Billy Corgan did with the Chicago Bob Luce, wrestling records, or, what some of the other, what Triple H has done with some of the title belts. He bought all of this stuff from Tony Santos. Brian, did I mention to you the amount, or did you already know it?
You told me the amount. I didn't know the amount before.
$1,500. I was 14 years old. I would have got $1,500 together to pay for it back then. But that's like, what, $300 a ton. And I guess Einhorn then realized, well, what the fuck? This is 5 tons of stuff. And apparently it was in boxes with no, the people at Notre Dame try to respect the integrity. When a collection is donated to them, they try to respect the sorting process, the integrity of what the creator, the owner, the person, but there was none here. This was we're going to be talking about Jack Pfefer off of this visit alone and other people that he came in contact with for a number of weeks, probably on the program, because there's such an incredible wealth of history there that nobody was ever able to know publicly before. But nevertheless, Einhorn donates it to the University of Notre Dame. The Hesburgh Library there has I don't want to overstate them or, misrepresent, but it's either the largest collection in the United States or the largest collection in the world of sports papers and sports archives from personalities in that field of all kinds, not just wrestling. And this is the, the Rare Books and Special Collections Department is who oversees all this type of thing. But he donated it to them in like 1977. And it all sat there pretty much untouched for over 20 years. And Brian, I know you and me, we're both wrestling nerds, but nobody as I remember, nobody had any idea that it existed during that time period. Is that the way you remember it? Did you ever hear anything about it?
I don't recall the first time I heard about it, but I remember my mind being blown. It must have been, sometime within like 20 years ago, let's say, when I heard that there was a collection of all this stuff at Notre Dame. It almost didn't sound real.
Yeah.
How come no one else is talking about this? How come this isn't out there? And, it's extraordinary. And if I could ask you just one question before you jump back to it, you said there's a gap, approximately 30 to 32, 33, whatever it was. Does that mean you have documents before then? Because that's when he's working with Jack Curley. Because that's Jack Curley and him and Rudy Miller in New York, right before he goes against the Office. And really changes a lot of things in the way the media covers wrestling. But that's my question. Was there stuff before that point?
Yes. I mean, here's the thing. You can ask me. I can tell you what I saw. I can't tell you what is there because between Tom, Bobby, Chris, and I, we probably went through, if we went through 2 or 3 complete boxes each, that in the 2 days, that'd be 8 boxes, right? There are over 250 special archival file boxes separated into categories of correspondence, clippings and programs, photos, of every business papers, financial documents, tax returns. I saw just in the 2 or 3 boxes, and what other people were showing me that they were looking at stuff from the mid to late 20s through 1967. So, I mean, there is a finding aid, which we'll get into later on, that they've set up, because this is part of the story, is nobody knew it was there. Nobody knew this fucking thing, the whole thing existed. But the previous curator of the department, the head of the, special collections department there, George Rugg, in the late 90s, started trying to put some order to it and started doing their cataloging system that they do with, the other collections. And they created over the years what they called a finding aid, where it's online now that you can look up names, or they're broken down into different categories. But it took him, he started in the late 90s and he just retired I think like very recently, like in the last year or two, I believe. And over the past several years, he had really pressed the pedal to it to try to get it finished before he retired. It took almost 30 years for people. And bless them, they're very smart people and they're archivists and they're librarians but they had no idea of the wrestling business from 100 years ago when they went into it, right? And the current curator is a fellow named Greg Bond, and he was the one who hosted us, and great guy. And he said, the same thing. He said, this is all, fascinating when we hear so much about it, but we didn't have a wrestling background going into this. So it was difficult for us. And we learn something every time that somebody comes in that, is researching this. But that's the thing is it's still, there's still some things that haven't been scanned and, the oversized posters and giant photographs. He's got lithographs from 80 years ago or whatever of wrestlers, but and you can't, I guess we should say it right now before we go any further. We got a big audience and I'm telling you how great it is. And now I'm going to say, don't fucking go. Don't try. This is not a roadside tourist attraction. It's not a fan fest. It's not a flea market. This is the goddamn University of Notre Dame. And that's why it sounded so bizarre that they would have a massive collection of pro wrestling stuff from Jack Pfefer, right? But I've told you the story of how it got here, but you can't just show up, knock on these people's door and say, show me some cool wrestling shit. They'll probably call the goddamn campus police on you. And I saw a few of those too. Tom Burke has been there before. I mean, he's a recognized name in research and wrestling, and he knew the previous curator. And that's how he was able to register us. But this is a deal where you have to tell them that you're coming and what you're wanting to research, because there were other people doing research for books in other fields in the next room while we were sitting there. So this is a thing that goes on. They got to know you're coming. You got to tell them what you're looking for and pick it up from their finding aid ahead of time so they can pull it for you if possible, because you can't go in the room where it's actually all stored. They bring you a box at a time at your request. You have to register and show your ID. You have to check your bag in a fucking locker and only keep either, your telephone or your goddamn pad or laptop or whatever. No ink pens. You have to wash your hands before you open a box and handle anything. They give you foam mats to put the stuff out on. There's cameras everywhere. They keep an eye on your ass, and you're only allowed to take one file out of one box at a time with a marker to put the place in so it goes right back in the same place. So this is not
Good.
like...
That's the way it should be.
Well, I'm just saying, and again, you're not only on candid camera, but you've given them a copy of your ID when you've come in. And I mean, this is not like I'm saying, I don't want this to be ruined by anybody going, hey, show me the goddamn shit of the fucking angel. But this is a serious deal. And the problem is that I see is that even Tom Burke, Bobby, and I, the three of us, combined age 200 years. And out of that, 170 years have been following wrestling combined, right? We were still trying to figure out from what we were looking at, well, who was he talking about there? Because they all used nicknames. Or was this the time period where so-and-so? I'm afraid in 10 years or so, there's still going to be smart people like Brian Solomon and, as I said, Hornbaker and all these people doing research. But the people that have been in the business that kind of were really familiar or could figure out and piece together the wording and the phrasing and the nicknames and who was talking about what may be gone. So I'm really anxious. I'm already sold myself on going again. Not anytime soon though, but it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen that he was able to not only collect this stuff and retain it all those years, but that it end up through fair means and foul. And after, 30 years of, obscurity, it's actually in a place now where they're preserving it for the future generations that are able to crack the code and figure out what everything means. And so because the thing, it's all paperwork to Pfefer. It's obviously not his letters for the most part. I saw his tax returns, and there's things in his handwriting that, he would, the guy was so compulsive, Brian, that you would imagine just a blank standard size piece of white paper, right? There would be figures, down a column, 20 figures, and then the next column, 20 figures, the next column, 20 figures, the next column, 20 figures, $1.20, 75 cents, 60 cents, $1.40. He recorded the cost of his telephone calls and his telegrams. But there's these just pages and pages of these worksheets. Just and he kept all that shit. But every letter that any promoter ever wrote to him, and every clipping and press release that any of his wrestlers sent in after he got them booked in a place, here's how they're using me, here's how I'm doing. And every telegram that was, it's incredible. I have droned on. Do you have any questions before we move on? I got a couple of things I'll hit you with.
No, and obviously this will be an ongoing series of segments for a long time here on the show. So for those of you who love wrestling history, the Drive-Thru and the experience in the midst of all the contemporary stuff we talk about is going to be loaded to the tits with classic wrestling. One question before you get to this, and obviously you know what I'm into. I'm fascinated by all this. I have a pretty large collection and even some original Pfefer stuff, but I can only imagine how much... fun's the only word I could think of, just the idea of sitting there and going through it. The only question I have for you right now is, what does it make you think about your collection? Does it change? Does it change what you think a possible future could be? I don't know. That's the only thing I would throw at you.
Well, now, how do you mean that now? Tell me that again.
Like, would Notre Dame have the Jim Cornette collection next to the Jack Pfefer collection?
Well, I don't think it would be for the rare books and special collections division because, I have some files of insider paperwork from the modern era, but even my collection of wrestling memorabilia is still mostly stuff that was sold publicly or that's, was distributed to the public or whatever. There's plenty of that here too. Rare programs of people I didn't even know ran cities in the United States at this point in time. There's programs from that I've never seen before, but this is all insider paperwork and business at the highest level involving every major promoter and wrestler in the business at some time or another. And the size and scope of it, your files, my files, everybody, Tootsie's files, whoever the fuck, no, shove them up your ass. It's just not only of the bulk, but of the uniqueness, the rarity, and the honesty, because he's got these other promoters that are his friends. Willie Gilzenberg, in the same letter, he's talking about how the business is going and he's knocking other promoters. Oh, my wife, whatever her name was, Mabel, says hello, sends her regards. I saw the letter where Stu Hart informed Jack Pfefer that he and Helen wanted Pfefer to be Ross's godfather.
I wonder if Ross has that, because Ross is a historian he's the historian of the family.
Well, he don't have the letter that Stu wrote to Jack about it.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if he's aware of it, I guess, is the thing. Wow, that's something.
Well, I'm sure they told him, but that is so when they're sharing their personal opinions of what the other promoters are doing. And for as many people as hated Pfefer, There were also people that were loyal to him almost to the Willie Gilzenberg was writing him in the early 60s. And Gilzenberg, for those of you 70s WWF fans, he's the president of the WWF, but he was Vince Sr.'s partner for years. He went back with boxing and wrestling to the 30s. He knew everybody. And I think it was a Gilzenberg letter where I want to say it was his, where he was talking about Joe Malkowitz in San Francisco saying, I guess poor old Joe will never get his territory sorted out. And it was the next year Roy Shire came in and put him out of business.
Yeah, I think we did it on Guess the Program. I have here from Newark the 30th anniversary program for Willie Gilzenberg and Babe Coleman. Two boxing and wrestling promoters. So that's 62. So that puts it at 32 when Willie Gilzenberg would have started.
Yeah. So, but nevertheless, this is one of a kind. None of the other promoters that even wrote each other, and that's all they did was write each other letters and telegrams at that point in time, except for phone calls were the really, important shit. But nobody else kept anything like this besides Pfefer.
I guess that's the other remarkable thing, the idea that, according to what you said before, in the 70s, in the early 70s maybe, but definitely the 60s, maybe the 50s, that he would have had storage units all around Manhattan for something this size. That's kind of crazy too. I guess I don't really think of storage units as an old thing.
We say storage units because I asked Tom Burke about this, and as I mentioned, Tom's older than me, and he's researching for a friend of his that's writing a book on Pfefer. We say storage units as we use the terminology now, but he had some way of storing things around Manhattan. Let's put it that way. That's how, because obviously it's true because here this shit is. But here's the thing, because he never had a home and lived in hotels and was always on the road doing it, trying to book either when he was a promoter, an actual partner in the office, or then when he had pieces of talent, was trying to book them to promoters. He would write off $6 a day for meals 365 days a year off his income tax because he considered himself, he was always traveling for business. Every hotel, every telegram, every telephone call, these were his expenses. His entire life was a business expense.
Yeah, and I know at some point, maybe 25 years ago, 20 years ago, some Pfefer stuff ended up on eBay. I believe it was sold by a nephew or someone who was in the family. So
no, I think, and there was a separate collection also that somebody in the Santos family had it.
Oh, interesting.
I believe, I'm willing to be corrected, but somebody in the Santos family had it possibly, and that's what was sold. And there could be something else out there. There's no guarantee that Notre Dame, well, it's guaranteed Notre Dame's not all of it. There's some stuff missing. It can't be a lot.
Wow.
But there's other stuff out there, but this is, and again, we've gone long today and with what's happened, and I took a lot of pictures. Hotchkiss is going to be taking the chip from my camera and transferring this over because I took pictures of documents, because I took pages and pages of notes, but I couldn't write that much that fast. And so I felt like a spy in World War II. Oh, let me shoot this paper. But I want to just give you some random factoids, can I? And then we're going to do some longer form stuff, because I have the Fargo's letters gave me such financial records and such insight into not only their relationship, but the way Pfefer handled all of his talent at that time, that I'm going to be able to go back and look at some old cards in the various Tennessee towns, see what guys were making, see when business was up and down, extrapolate some of these things. But let me hit you with one thing here, Brian. Last, do you know how much Nature Boy Buddy Rogers earned as NWA World Champion in February 1962?
February 62. I do not know.
Now, see, there weren't any stadium shows. It was wintertime, right? Remember they'd done him and O'Connor in Comiskey Park the previous year. This is just a random month in 1962. And of course, this was when Vince Sr. and the New York bunch was monopolizing him, but still.
But Chicago, New York, Fred Kohler and Vince McMahon and Toots Mondt had a wannabe Goldust trio thing happening, and
Yes.
Buddy Rogers was the centerpiece.
And he in Chicago and New York, February 1962, $17,000. Do you know what $17,000 equals in today's money 63 years later?
No.
$181,574.07.
Wow.
That is the standard of living that he was accustomed to at that point in time in comparison to what everybody else was doing. And
comparison to what other athletes were doing. Yeah, I mean,
that's why Ernie Ladd quit football and why McDaniel quit football and etc. But this was another level than that. And the reason why I know this is because Gilzenberg, who again was partners with the guy that was paying Rogers, said Buddy gross, because, Pfefer had given, and now we know more than ever, Pfefer gave Rogers the gimmick. Pfefer was deducting capes, costumes, and sequins off his income tax too.
And then they had a major falling out, and some of us, you and I, both have those the giant papers that Pfefer put out saying that Buddy Rogers was a fake.
Yes, but that falling out had occurred in the early 50s, and then that's why Pfefer saw a tag team version of Buddy Rogers in the Fargos. More on that in the future. But Gilzenberg had given, Buddy given Pfefer the info. Yeah, Buddy grossed $17,000 in February. I guess he did. And another letter said, well, Buddy settled the lawsuit with Miller and Gotch. Now the boys can go their separate ways.
Huh.
Buddy's such a great worker. It's too bad he can't get along with the real wrestlers.
That's interesting. Yeah. Shawn Michaels.
But then you back up 10 years. In 1950, Pfefer had these, and these records are, again, his handwriting on these blank pieces of hotel stationery. He wrote on the back sides of them. But he had probably 20 or 30 wrestlers that he was booking out to promoters all over the place. Buddy Rogers and his handpicked opponent, Billy Darnell, probably the most popular. And he gave Christmas bonuses to all the wrestlers he was booking out. And so he wrote handwritten receipts received from, Jack Pfefer from Buddy Rogers or whatever the fuck, for Christmas bonus. He gave Rogers a Christmas bonus of $1,500. That's almost $20,000.
Wow.
But guess how much money that Jack Pfefer declared in income on his 1949 income taxes?
Before deductions or after deductions?
Well, either way. I got both.
I don't know. I actually am very curious about this.
Okay, well, I can tell you that his expenses were $26,000 because we talked about the train and the telegrams and the telephone and the capes, costumes, and sequins and meals on the road and all these legitimate expenses in his business, yet his life was that. There was never a day off or a non-business expense, right? So he took $26,000 off for expenses and declared $35,000. He had grossed $61,000, $7,000 from Cliff Maupin, the Toledo promoter, apparently for supplying him with all of his talent because they were close, and $54,825 in booking fees from talent, where he would get them booked and they would send him a portion of their money.
How much is that
And
today?
Rogers, hold on, Rogers led the list with $10,882 that he sent Pfefer. Now think about this. Was he given Pfefer 10%? That means he grossed $100,000 in 1950. Was he 20% would have been a little heavy for Rogers' stature. There would have been a blow up before that, but even then that would have been $50,000. The point is, Pfefer grossed in 1949 the equivalent of $813,000 in today's money by booking these guys out to all these promoters that either liked him or that he had sway over because of dirt on them or could badger them or blackmail them. And then the talent turned around and got these great spots. He made Rogers a ton of money. He had the Fargos in Madison Square Garden at the same time they were working the Tennessee territory. He could work magic for the people that he liked and that he believed in and that he wanted to push.
Where did his money go? If Pfefer was making that kind of money, that's just 1 year in 1950.
That's another thing. Nobody knows. Because there in this collection, there is almost no. He has a personal life and personal interactions with the wrestlers and the promoters. And he has a personal life in terms there's business paperwork, like there's income tax, personal papers like that. But there is no family. There is no woman. There's no man. There's no personal communication from anyone to him or whatever. So this was literally his life, and where all that money went, I don't know that anybody's asked yet, but it's a question that as soon as I saw, because I'm fascinated with how much money there used to be in the wrestling business. And when I saw that, I'm like, where did it go?
Yeah.
Of course, now in the 60s, and see, the thing is, when we get to the Fargos part, which will come at a future time when I've been able to transcribe a lot of this, do you remember the famous note where he had written down August 9, 1967, locker room, Nashville, Tennessee, meeting with Fargo, Goulas, Welch, and Christine Jarrett. This is where Christine Jarrett threatened to have me killed. That was the breakup finally with Jackie Fargo, where Fargo wasn't going to send him any more money. After all that time.
Oh, I never realized that's what it was over. That's interesting. Wow.
But because after that, all the programs from Nashville or from the Tennessee territory, the arena programs that he's got in the file, it's written in his handwriting after XX, after Double Cross. And Rats is written at the top of the program. And the Black Cat.
The Black Cat. I've got a few of those. Yeah.
You know where he got the Black Cat from?
Was it some magazine?
A perfume ad in a magazine.
And did he just have copies, nonstop copies made?
He must. No, all the ones I saw were originals. He must have bought like 100 copies of this fucking magazine, or it ran every month for years or whatever. But anyway, that's the thing. Again, you know, Pfefer was making in this bizarre life that he led, where he would take, usually he never flew. He would take trains from one territory to the other, and then he would ride around for periods of time with the wrestlers that he was booking and then go to the next place. And every morning when the Fargos would go pick him up, when they were on the road with him, Bobby Fulton, because Bobby Fulton got close to Jackie Fargo, they lived together in North Carolina, not together, but near each other in North Carolina. Pfefer would have letters spread out all over the hotel room floor. Look at what I've done. I've written all the letters all night. He stayed in contact with everybody and was pushing his talent. But, almost $1 million for this little odd man to do this fucking weird nomadish existence for all those years and be responsible not only for some of the biggest attractions and biggest money-making, gimmicks in the business. And then toward the end of his life, with all of the rip-off gimmicks and the bullshit fake talent, it killed some of the major markets. But he was always influential, always important in some respect.
Yeah, and in terms of documentation, a lot of the issues that broke out in wrestling 40s, 50s, 60s, he was in the middle of it. Even if he didn't start
Everything.
it, he got pulled into it because he had talent. So this is really promising
And
for the future of this show to hear more about this. This is great stuff.
some of these guys swore by him also. And anyway, and we're going to get into a lot of New York history too that you're going to have to help me with on this New York geography, because it looks like to me they were running a show every night of the week in New York City somewhere.
That may be so. I was going to ask you, I remember seeing documents, it may be from Hornbaker. I may have them somewhere, actually, now that I think about it, but it was NWA members like chewing out Sam Mushnick over the idea he would even talk to Pfefer, let alone consider allowing him near the... Was it Eddie Quint? I forget who it was now. It's driving me crazy, but one of the promoters like sent Mushnick a letter lambasting him for having anything to do with Jack Pfefer.
Yes. And meanwhile, Mushnick was cordial to Pfefer because Mushnick was a path of least resistance guy, and why stir this nut up? And, he has...
He'll come talk to the newspapers. Exactly. Why piss this guy off? He's going to come talk to the newspapers, say my wrestlers are fake, and then bring in the most extraordinary gimmicks I've ever seen in this town. He'll kill the town.
Yeah. Well, and that was when he said to Christine Jarrett and Nick and Roy and Fargo and they were in the girls' locker room also. He made note of that in the girls' locker room in Nashville because Christine had always told me he was trying to get his girls booked. Well, he already had the girls booked, but I think that's when he and Fargo had the blow up. And we'll cover it more later, but that was the thing, is that was kind of his last lifeline.
Yeah, that was after Akron, Ohio. That was after Tony Santos is pretty much done. Yeah.
And I couldn't, but when I opened up the file and I saw that, because I've seen photocopies that other researchers have made, but when I saw that in person, I'm like, oh, it's the greatest thing I've ever seen. And one more thing, and then we'll move on. I had a piece of paper here somewhere. Oh, it took me a while, but I figured out that every time that Willie Gilzenberg would write Jack Pfefer, he wouldn't call Jim Barnett by his name. He calls him the Wizard. Barnett was the Wizard.
I find that so interesting just because, Willie Gilzenberg, obviously based out in Newark, Northeast promoter.
Chicago. No, remember Chicago.
Well, Barnett was out of Chicago pretty early on. And then
they all got together at that point. Apparently, they were spending holidays at each other's houses in these letters. So there was a lot more.
The Wizard.
Not only were there a lot more wrestling promoters in the 40s and 50s than there were in the 60s and 70s, but they stayed in touch with each other. They all knew what the fucking scuttlebutt was.
Is there anything from Barnett to Pfefer? I'm thinking I don't know anything about them having a relationship or any dealings with each other.
See, that's the thing. There may very well be, but you can literally search any name in the wrestling business between the 30s and the 60s, and there's something. Even if I opened up a goddamn Roy Welch file, it said Roy Welch, 1941. I'm like, oh my God, what could that be? And it was a letter from him asking if he could get the Swedish Angel booked.
In 41, wow.
But in Nashville, right? But point being, then there was other stuff with the Goulas Welch office later on when he got with the Fargos. But there's something with anybody's name on it that was in the wrestling business. So you just have to just keep looking until you can't look anymore. Brian, what we should do after we do all this research into Jack Pfefer is it gives you stress and it gives you anxiety trying to figure all this out. You need to calm your brain down. You need to unwind and maybe look for a natural way to relieve all the aches and discomfort of sitting there poring over all of these old files. Yeah, alone, my finger from turning pages was sore as it could be. Our friends at Cornbread Hemp have got us fixed up. We've talked about the seltzers in the past here recently that Stacy's a big fan of, but you know what? That I took with me on my trip so I could try to sleep through all the misery, all the unlucky things that were going on to me, the CBD gummies. because our friends at Cornbread Hemp here in Louisville, Kentucky, by the way, they are determined to make the CBD gummies that are formulated to work with your body and not against it. Because I'm not as young as you're not as young as you used to be either, Brian. That's a statement I can make factually. You're not as young as you were last week. The clock is ticking. You gotta have peace of mind. Your physical and mental wellness.
I got pizza mind.
I said peace of mind, not pizza mind.
Oh, forget it.
And besides, it's the wrong kind of pizza. You know what you ought to do? You ought to have one of those plain old ordinary pizzas you have with just cheese and dough. You ought to have it with the Cornbread Hemp CBD gummies on the top of it.
Oh.
That would solve a variety of problems. Can you see a problem with that?
I could see a delicious problem with that.
Well, the CBD gummies from Cornbread Hemp, folks, is not something you're just going to pick up on the side of the road at some Apple stand. They're made to help you feel better, whether it's stress, discomfort, or just needing relaxation, because they only use the best part of the hemp plant for the purest and most potent CBD, formulated to help relieve the discomfort, the stress, and the sleeplessness or the sleeplessness that you have after the stress. And they have third-party lab tested all of these items, and they are USDA organic. So they've got at least one organ that's ground up into all of these CBD gummies. So I wonder if it's a liver or a kidney. What organ?
I don't think it's like that.
Well, they're organic. And we can save you some money, folks, because right now, our listeners, that's you out there, can save 30% on your first order if you go to Cornbread. And I assume everybody knows how to spell corn and bread and put them together. Hemp, H-E-M-P, not pimp, but hemp. Several people were misdirected to Cornbread Pimp, and they ended up getting a goddamn surprise at the front door. Cornbreadhemp.com/JCE and use the code JCE at checkout. You're going to get 30% off your first order. Well, these things will just help you, just knock you right out and then pick you right up and then put you right over on the other side of the fence.
Great products. Very popular here in this household. Suzanne, every time I get some, Suzanne steals it. She's a very big fan of Cornbread Hemp, and we think the listeners will be as well.
I thought every time you got some, Suzanne was mad about it.
Once again, we're
maybe it's not the same kind of getting some.
Talking about a different kind of thing.
A different thing. And by the way, they're not cornbread flavored. There's been that question has been raised. They're not cornbread flavored. It's just the folks from Cornbread Hemp.
But they're keeping They're keeping their future options open. So no guarantees for the future, but great products. Our friends from Cornbread Hemp, they support us. You should support them. How can the listeners do that, Jim?
Well, by giving them some money, I would think, but you don't have to give them much money because they're going to knock 30% off because you know us. Cornbreadhemp.com/JCE.